Hey everyone, ready to dive into the roaring 20s?
The jazz age.
You got it. We're going beyond the glitz and glamour to uncover what made this decade so fascinating and tumultuous.
Oh, it was definitely both. A time of incredible change, but also a lot of pushback against that change.
It seems like every step forward led to some kind of backlash.
Right.
Like with the women of the era, 1920, the 19th Amendment finally gets ratified. Women get the right to
A
vote.
huge victory, yeah.
But it was just the beginning for many women, right?
Absolutely. They weren't content with just the ballot box. They wanted control over their lives, their bodies, their futures.
Like Margaret Sanger,
Oh, yeah, Sanger. She really pushed the boundaries, a tireless advocate for birth control,
even opened the first birth control clinic in America.
and landed in jail for it, too.
It's wild to think that access to birth control was once so controversial. And what's even more interesting is that Sanger aligned herself with the eugenics movement,
Yeah, that's a complicated part of her legacy.
to say the least. For those who might not know, the eugenics movement was, well, it was about controlling reproduction to supposedly improve the human race.
And it often targeted marginalized communities, led to some pretty horrific practices.
Yeah, it definitely raises some ethical questions about Sanger's work that we can't ignore, but it shows how messy history can be.
For sure.
Speaking of pushing boundaries, we can't forget the flappers.
Oh, the iconic flappers.
More than just a fashion statement, right? Bobbed hair, short dresses, love for jazz.
Yeah, they were throwing out the old rule book, rewriting the rules for what it meant to be a modern woman.
Exactly. It was like they were saying, we're not going to be defined by tradition anymore.
I think their rebellion speaks to a deeper societal shift that was happening, this desire for freedom and self-expression,
Totally.
rejecting those Victorian ideals.
It's like they were saying, we're going to experience life on our own terms.
Which, of course, was met with plenty of resistance.
Oh, yeah. But you can't deny their energy, that spirit. Really captured the roaring 20s. And speaking of roaring, we got to talk about jazz.
The music that defined the era.
More than just a new genre, right?
Oh, yeah, it was a revolution. Improvisation, rhythm, breaking the rules, blending traditions. It was fresh, exciting.
And it's fascinating how the Great Migration played a role in all of this.
The Great Migration.
Yeah, the mass movement of African Americans from the rural South to northern cities.
Ah, right.
It started in the late 19th century, but really picked up during World War I.
Right, because of the labor shortages up north.
Exactly. So you have all these incredibly talented black musicians coming from places like New Orleans to Chicago and New York.
Bringing all those new sounds and influences shaped the evolution of jazz.
And pretty soon, it wasn't just a black musical form anymore, right?
Nope. White audiences were flocking to clubs in Harlem.
Like the Savoy,
The Cot Club.
to hear this electrifying new music. But of course, this was still the era of segregation.
It's a real contradiction. You have this celebration of black culture, this musical revolution captivating America.
Right.
But at the same time, Jim Crow laws, racial discrimination, deeply entrenched.
It's heartbreaking, really. Even in a place like Harlem, the supposed center of black culture, you have places like the Cotton Club only allowing white audiences.
While black performers are essentially forced to play on a stage designed to evoke racist stereotypes.
Shows how deeply ingrained prejudice was.
Yeah, progress isn't always a straight line.
That's for sure. But in the midst of all of this, you also have this incredible flourishing of black artistry, intellectualism.
The Harlem Renaissance.
That's the one. Langston Hughes and his powerful poetry, Zora Neale Hurston with her groundbreaking novels.
Aaron Douglas, who revolutionized visual art.
They weren't just creating art, right? They were challenging stereotypes, reclaiming their narrative.
Demanding recognition.
And you can't talk about the Harlem Renaissance without mentioning Marcus Garvey,
And the UNIA.
the Universal Negro Improvement Association.
That's it.
Garvey was all about black nationalism, self-reliance. He urged black people to build their own economic and political power.
Even envisioned a return to Africa.
His message really resonated with many who were frustrated with the slow pace of progress.
It's interesting how his approach differed from other civil rights leaders, like W.E.B. Du Bois, who advocated for integration.
Right.
Garvey believed in black self-determination, creating a separate black nation,
Wow.
either in Africa or elsewhere.
And he wasn't afraid to make a statement. The UNIA Organized those massive parades through Harlem.
Oh, yeah, with banners proclaiming, "White man rules America, black man shall rule Africa."
Bold message.
Didn't sit well with everyone.
Especially not with J. Edgar Hoover,
The head of the Bureau of Investigation.
which later became the FBI.
Right.
He saw Garvey as a threat, used his agency to surveil, undermine the UNIA, and ultimately
Led to Garvey's arrest and deportation.
It's sad to see how a movement that aimed to uplift black people was crushed by the very government that claimed to stand for freedom. And to make things even more tragic, all this was happening while a wave of racial violence was sweeping across the nation.
The Red Summer of 1919.
Yes, the Red Summer, horrific period of racial terror. White mobs attacking black communities in over 25 cities. It's a brutal reminder of the deep-seated racism that persisted.
And the violence wasn't limited to the South. It erupted in cities all across the country.
It was a national crisis.
Fueled by economic competition, housing shortages, this resurgence of white supremacy after World War I.
One of the most shocking examples is the Chicago race riot, triggered by the death of a black teenager who crossed an unofficial segregation line on a Lake Michigan beach.
Lasted for days, resulted in deaths of both black and white residents.
And then, just a couple years later, you have the Tulsa Race Massacre, 1921, where a white mob, driven by false accusations and resentment, destroyed the thriving black community of Greenwood.
Hundreds killed, thousands left homeless, a once prosperous neighborhood reduced to ashes.
It's mind-boggling how little justice was served for the victims of these horrific acts.
Like the authorities just turned a blind eye.
And as if that wasn't enough, you also have the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan during this period.
The Klan's revival in the 1920s wasn't just about racism.
Oh, right.
They expanded their hatred to include immigrants, Catholics, Jews, anyone they perceived as a threat.
To their definition of American.
Exactly. And they used these sophisticated marketing tactics to spread their message, presenting themselves as defenders of traditional values, preying on people's fears about all these social and cultural changes.
It's chilling how they were able to exploit anxieties and gain power. And their influence extended far beyond the South. They were active in every region of the country.
Even holding marches in major cities, infiltrating local government.
The dark chapter in American history. A reminder that progress could be fragile.
That the forces of intolerance can resurface.
Yeah. But the 1920s weren't just about conflict and violence, right? They were also significant cultural clashes.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly around the issue of evolution.
Its place in education.
Exactly. It's like the whole country was captivated by the Scopes trial. Put the spotlight on this growing conflict between fundamentalist Christianity and the scientific theory of evolution.
It was dubbed the monkey trial by the media.
Which went into a total frenzy.
Oh, yeah. Covering every detail.
It really captured those anxieties of the time. This wasn't just about a science textbook, right?
No, it was symbolic of this larger battle between traditionalism and modernism, faith and reason.
The old ways and the new. And the scene in Dayton, Tennessee.
Where the trial took place.
Yeah. It was like something out of a movie. Crowds of people, reporters from all over, even a chimpanzee.
Brought in for publicity.
You can see how this case touched a nerve.
It was a spectacle. Two larger-than-life figures at the center of it all.
William Jennings Bryan,
The famed orator.
representing the prosecution.
Yeah.
And Clarence Darrow,
The renowned defense attorney.
It was a clash of titans.
Yeah.
Each side representing a different vision of America.
Bryan argued that teaching evolution undermined religious faith and morality. Darrow defended academic freedom and the importance of scientific inquiry.
And one of the most dramatic moments came when Darrow called Bryan to the stand.
As an expert on the Bible.
Can you imagine that happening today? A lawyer grilling a politician on their religious beliefs?
The media would have a field day.
Darrow's questioning exposed the inconsistencies in Bryan's literal interpretation of the Bible.
Made him appear out of touch with modern thought.
And while Scopes was ultimately found guilty,
He did break the law after all.
the trial is seen as a symbolic victory for the pro-evolution side.
Absolutely.
And the trial really hurt the fundamentalist movement in the eyes of many. Bryan died just a few days after it ended.
His passing seemed to symbolize the end of an era.
But the debate over evolution and its place in education didn't end there, right? It continues to this day.
It shows how some cultural battles can just keep going.
And speaking of battles, the 1920s weren't just about social and cultural upheaval.
Right.
The nation was also undergoing a massive economic transformation,
The Roaring Twenties saw the rise of consumerism.
fueled by mass production, advertising, the availability of credit. New technologies like the automobile, the radio, household
They
appliances,
became symbols of modernity.
the American dream.
Exactly.
It's like everyone wanted the latest gadgets. It was a time of unprecedented prosperity for some. But we can't forget that this wealth wasn't shared equally.
A crucial point.
Hmm.
While the wealthy enjoyed unprecedented luxury, many farmers and industrial workers struggled.
Yeah.
This growing income inequality.
Would contribute to the Great Depression.
That's right.
It's amazing how this one decade was such a whirlwind of contradictions. Excitement and anxiety, progress and backlash, prosperity and inequality.
Like a microcosm of the American experience itself.
We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. From flappers and jazz to the Harlem Renaissance and the Scopes trial, it's clear this decade was one of dramatic transformation, intense conflict.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore.
You got that right. In the next part, we'll delve even deeper into the economic and social forces that shaped this tumultuous era. Stay tuned.
I'm looking forward to it.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Roaring Twenties.
Still roaring, huh?
Oh, absolutely. In this part, we're going to explore the economic boom that transformed America, but also those underlying tensions,
The inequalities.
Yeah, that would eventually lead to the Great Depression. Remember, we're still unpacking all those sources you shared, looking for those hidden gems of insight.
And one thing that really jumps out is the role of technology. In driving this economic transformation, in the 1920s, you see this rise of mass production.
Especially in the automobile industry, right?
Yeah. Henry Ford's Model T revolutionized transportation
Made cars affordable.
for the average American.
Hard to imagine life without cars today, isn't it?
Right.
Back then, it was a game changer. Suddenly, people have more freedom to travel, to move to the suburbs, to experience the world beyond their, immediate surroundings. And this had these ripple effects.
Oh, absolutely. The automobile industry fueled growth in other industries. Steel, rubber, oil,
Created new jobs.
spurred the development of infrastructure, roads, highways,
And then you have the emergence of other consumer goods,
radios, telephones, household appliances.
which, further transformed American life.
Like a whole new world was opening up.
And everyone wanted to be a part of it.
Advertisers tapped into this desire for modernity, selling not just products, but a lifestyle.
A vision of the American dream.
Exactly.
And it wasn't just material goods, right? The 1920s saw the rise of a new leisure culture.
People flocking to movie theaters, dance halls, sporting events.
It was a time of liberation, a celebration of youth and, well, modernity, I guess you could say.
And this cultural shift was reflected in the changing roles of women, like we talked about earlier, the flappers.
Pushing boundaries.
Challenging those traditional notions of femininity, embracing a more independent lifestyle.
They smoked cigarettes, drank cocktails, danced to jazz, and weren't afraid to,
Voice their opinions.
Exactly. It was like they were saying, we're not going to be confined by the old rules anymore.
They wanted to experience life on their own terms, even if it meant
Pushing boundaries.
challenging those social norms.
And their rebellion went beyond just fashion and behavior.
Women were entering the workforce in greater numbers, taking on new roles.
In offices, factories,
Professions, they were demanding greater autonomy.
challenging traditional gender roles.
Of course, this wasn't without its critics.
Oh, right.
Some saw these changes as a threat,
To the fabric of society.
a sign of moral decay they wanted to go back to.
Simpler times.
The values of hard work, thrift.
Religious piety.
Exactly. And this backlash against modernity played out in various ways, like the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan.
Which targeted.
Not only black people, but immigrants, Catholics, Jews, anyone they perceived as a threat to their vision of America.
It's a reminder that progress is rarely linear, often met with resistance.
From those who feel threatened or benefit from the status quo.
And this tension between, progress and reaction, it was a defining characteristic of the 1920s.
It was. And this tension was also evident in the economic sphere. The overall economy boomed, but there are these disparities.
In wealth and income,
Right. Farmers in particular struggled as agricultural prices declined
many rural communities felt left behind,
by the prosperity of the cities.
and this resentment fueled a growing.
Urban-rural divide.
It's interesting how some of these tensions from the 1920s still resonate today, isn't it?
Oh, definitely.
We still grapple with issues like economic inequality, cultural clashes, political polarization. It's like,
History is repeating itself.
in some ways, yeah.
It makes you wonder, are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past? Or can we?
Learn from history.
chart a different course.
That's a question for the ages, right?
Right.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We still have more to uncover about the Roaring Twenties. In our next segment, we'll delve into the darker side of the decade, exploring the social and racial tensions that simmered beneath the surface.
Sounds fascinating.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to our final deep dive into the 1920s.
Wow, time flies.
It really does. We've explored the highs and lows, the triumphs and tragedies.
The cultural revolutions.
Yeah, and those simmering tensions, right?
Definitely.
That really defined this era.
It's remarkable how the 1920s, despite being a century ago,
Right.
still feels so relevant.
Totally. We see those echoes of the past in our own social and political landscapes, in the way we deal with inequality,
Yeah.
technological disruption.
The search for identity in this rapidly changing world.
It's like history is rhyming, not repeating exactly,
Right.
but those familiar themes, those struggles.
Like the economic boom and bust cycle.
Oh, yeah, from back then.
We see the parallels in our own history.
Periods of, rapid growth followed by downturns.
The paralyzers striking.
Unbridled speculation, the widening gap between the rich and poor, that belief that the good times would never end.
It feels familiar.
Like a cautionary tale,
Yeah.
reminding us that economic prosperity isn't always sustainable.
That unchecked greed, inequality.
Can have devastating consequences.
Absolutely.
It's a reminder to be mindful of history, right?
Yeah.
To learn from those mistakes.
We strive for a better future.
More equitable, sustainable.
For sure.
But beyond the economic lessons,
Right.
what else can we learn?
The 1920s also offer insights into those social and cultural movements.
Yeah, their power to drive change, both positive and negative.
Think about women's suffrage, the Harlem Renaissance,
A rise of consumerism.
and even the backlash against these changes.
It's that constant push and pull, progress and resistance, a battle of ideas and values.
Living out on a national stage.
Exactly. And we see similar dynamics today, right?
Okay.
Movements like Black Lives Matter, #MeToo,
The fight for LGBTQ plus rights,
challenging the status quo.
demanding equality, justice
But they face that pushback too.
from those who, cling to tradition.
It seems like that's the nature of progress, right? Rarely a smooth path.
It's bumpy.
There are always those who resist, who fear change.
Or benefit from the existing order.
But throughout history,
Those who fight for justice,
they've prevailed.
even if it takes time.
It's inspiring, isn't it?
Yeah.
That courage, resilience,
Fighting for a better world.
even when the odds are stacked against them. It makes you wonder, what will future generations say about our time?
Oh, that's a great question.
How will they judge our response to the challenges we face? Like climate change, political polarization.
The rise of AI,
It's almost like we're living through our own Roaring Twenties,
a time of rapid change, uncertainty.
where the old rules are being rewritten, the future is.
Well, it's up for grabs.
A pivotal moment in history, and the choices we make today
Will have a profound impact.
on tomorrow. So as we wrap up,
Our deep dive.
what's the takeaway?
What's the one thing you want our listener to remember?
I think the most important lesson is that history isn't just facts and dates.
Yeah.
It's a story
Of us.
of human beings grappling with complex challenges, striving for a better future, making choices that shape events. By studying the past,
We can gain a deeper understanding of the present
and maybe even find some guidance.
for navigating the future.
It's tricky.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on.
I agree.
We've explored the glitz and the grit, the triumphs and the tragedies.
It's been a journey.
And we've seen how the echoes of this era continue to resonate.
Definitely.
It's been fascinating, and I hope our listeners
I hope so too.
have found it enlightening.
Yeah. And as always, we encourage you to keep exploring, ask questions, challenge assumptions, and engage with history.
You never know what you might find.
That's right. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the 1920s.
It was a pleasure.